The moment the world noticed. The night was cool, the city alive with its usual rush. When the moment happened that no one expected, Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves walked out of a quiet theater in Los Angeles side by side, their steps unhurried, their faces calm. The cameras waiting outside had prepared for just another glimpse of Hollywood faces. But what they captured instead was something more than celebrity. It was a bond, raw and unspoken, that seemed to shine brighter than the flashing lights around them. Keanu wore his usual simple clothes. Nothing flashy, nothing meant to draw attention. Sandra, dressed modestly, kept her head lowered at first. But when Keanu leaned closer and whispered something that made her smile faintly, she lifted her eyes, and the world saw it. It wasn't just a smile, it was relief, as if the weight she had been carrying had lightened for a brief moment. The photographs spread within hours, filling screens around the globe, and people began to whisper, was this friendship, was it love, or was it something even deeper that could not be defined? Behind the cameras, the truth was quieter and more complicated. Sandra had been struggling with a season of grief that weighed heavily on her. She had faced personal loss that left her mornings empty and her nights endless. She wanted to disappear from the spotlight, to let the world forget her for a while. But Keanu knew. He had seen the cracks in her laughter, the shadows in her silence, and instead of waiting for her to ask, he stepped in. Not as a star, not as a man trying to rescue, but as a friend who carried his own scars and understood what it meant to feel broken. Inside the theater earlier that night, while the world outside buzzed with gossip and entertainment, they had sat quietly side by side. Sandra's hand trembled as she held her cup of tea, and Keanu, without a word, steadied it for her. He did not try to fill the silence with meaningless words. He simply sat there, a steady presence, as though telling her that silence did not have to mean loneliness. When the movie ended and she hesitated to leave, fearing the outside noise, he offered his hand, not pulling, not pushing, just offering. And she took it. The world saw only the photographs of two famous faces leaving a building. But the bond captured in those photographs was born not from the stage lights of Hollywood, but from small, quiet moments of kindness. Moments when Keanu reminded her that grief did not have to be carried alone. Moments when Sandra allowed herself to lean, even if only slightly, on someone she trusted. Later that night, when they returned to her home, Sandra sat on the couch with tired eyes, the weight of the day pressing down again. She whispered softly, almost afraid of the sound of her own voice, "Why are you always here when I fall apart?" Keanu looked at her for a long moment before answering, his voice low but steady. "Because I know how it feels when no one is." His words sank into her heart like a truth she had been avoiding. She realized he was not there because he pitied her, nor because he wanted to play hero. He was there because he understood, because life had carved the same scars into him. And instead of closing his heart, he had chosen to open it. And as she leaned back, closing her eyes, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: safety. It was not the safety of walls or locked doors, but the safety of knowing that even in the storm, she was not alone. The cameras outside would keep chasing them. The headlines would keep writing their own versions of the truth. But inside that quiet room, the real story was different. It was about two souls who had carried pain, who had lived through loss, and who had found comfort not in grand gestures, but in presence. For those who later saw the photographs, it became a mystery to solve. For Sandra, sitting in the dim light with Keanu by her side, it was something far more precious. It was a reminder that even in Hollywood, where stories are written and rewritten every day, some bonds cannot be scripted. And that night, as she finally allowed herself to rest, she understood something important. Sometimes the truest connections are the ones that need no explanation. Whispers and walls. The next morning, the world was already buzzing. Every news outlet carried the photographs of Sandra and Keanu leaving the theater together. Headlines twisted the images into every story they could imagine. Some called it a rekindled romance, others insisted it was a publicity stunt. On social media, fans debated endlessly, some celebrating the idea of them together, others picking apart every detail of their expressions. Inside Sandra's home, the noise of the world felt far away, yet its weight still reached her. She sat at the kitchen table, her phone buzzing with calls and messages she could not bring herself to answer. Her manager had left 3 voicemails already, all of them urging her to make a statement, to shape the narrative before it ran wild. But how could she shape something that was not a story, only a reality too fragile to explain? Keanu, sitting across from her, quietly buttered a slice of bread. He placed it in front of her without a word, his calm presence softening the chaos she felt. Sandra gave him a faint smile, but her voice trembled as she said, "They're going to turn this into something it's not. They always do." Keanu looked at her with that same steady gaze, the kind that felt like it saw through the noise. "Let them," he said gently. "They only know how to invent stories. We know the truth. That's enough." But for Sandra, it wasn't enough. The thought of the world pulling apart her pain, twisting it into entertainment, tore at her. She remembered the years when she had carefully built walls to keep her private life protected. Now, with a few photographs, those walls were cracking, and the truth she didn't want to admit, even to herself, was that Keanu was becoming more than comfort. He was becoming the person she leaned on, the person she trusted with her fragile heart, and that thought scared her more than the paparazzi. Later that afternoon, her manager came by. His words were sharp, his tone clipped as he scolded her. "Sandra, this will ruin your reputation if you don't control it. You've always been careful, always private. You can't let people think you're weak, clinging to someone else. You need to make a statement." Sandra's chest tightened, shame mixing with anger. Before she could respond, Keanu, who had stayed quiet until then, spoke in his calm but firm voice. "She doesn't need to prove strength to anyone. Real strength is being human even when people don't understand it." His words filled the room with a silence heavier than any argument. The manager glanced at him, frustrated, but found no response strong enough. After he left, Sandra turned to Keanu, her eyes wet with unspilled tears. "Why do you keep defending me when you know they'll turn against you too?" Keanu leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. "Because I know what it feels like to stand alone when the world decides what your life should mean. I won't let you face that alone." His words touched her deeply, but they also left her conflicted. She feared the cost of his loyalty, feared the backlash he might face because of her. But even in her fear, she knew something undeniable. She needed him there. That night, unable to sleep, Sandra stepped outside into the cool air of her backyard. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the stars, whispering the question that burned inside her. What if I'm falling for him, and the world destroys us before we even begin? She didn't notice Keanu standing quietly in the doorway, watching her with eyes that carried the same question. The world grows louder. The photographs from that night did not fade away. Instead, they multiplied, echoed across screens, printed in magazines, replayed in talk shows. Every angle was analyzed. Every glance slowed down as if people could find the truth in pixels. Sandra had lived through rumors before, but this time felt different. This time the world wasn't just looking at her. It was looking at her with Keanu. And that bond she was trying so hard to keep private was now a stage for everyone else's opinions. She sat alone one morning. Scrolling through headlines she told herself she wouldn't read. The words stung. Using grief for attention. Leaning on KeanuReeves to revive her career. A love story or a sympathy act. She tossed the phone aside, her hands shaking. She wanted to be strong, but the words dug into her heart like tiny needles. Keanu found her sitting on the edge of the couch, her head in her hands. Without asking, he sat beside her and let the silence stretch until she finally whispered, "They make me feel like my pain isn't even mine anymore, like it's just something for them to sell." His voice was low, steady, and unshaken. "They don't own your story, Sandra, you do. And no headline can take that from you." His words calmed her, but they also scared her. Because she realized something in that moment. She was beginning to depend on him in ways she never thought she could depend on anyone again. And the more she let him in, the more the fear grew. What if the world destroyed him too? What if her pain became his burden? The conflict inside her deepened when an old friend called. The voice on the other line was kind but firm. "Sandra, I've known you for years. I've never seen you this vulnerable. I don't want to see you hurt if people twist this into something it isn't." She didn't know how to answer because the truth was she was already hurt. But Keanu's presence softened the hurt, and that was something she wasn't ready to let go of. Later that week, they attended a small charity dinner, something Sandra had promised to show up for months earlier. She thought it would be quiet, unnoticed. But the moment they walked in together, heads turned. Whispers filled the room. People who had once praised her now eyed her with curiosity, some with judgment. She smiled politely, holding herself tall, but inside her chest tightened with fear. Keanu stayed close, guiding her gently through conversations, never taking the spotlight, only giving her strength. Yet she noticed the way people looked at him too, the way they whispered about him being the rescuer, the man who had stepped in to fix her brokenness, and it broke her heart. because she knew he wasn't there to fix her, he was there to walk beside her. When they left the event, Sandra finally let her emotions spill. Inside the car, her voice cracked as she said, "They don't see me. They don't see you. They only see a story they can sell. I hate it. I hate that I'm dragging you into this." Keanu turned his head toward her, his expression calm but serious. "Sandra, I'm here because I choose to be. Not because I'm forced. Not because the world expects it. I choose this. I choose you." The words hit her like a wave, comforting and terrifying all at once. She turned away, tears rolling down her cheeks silently because she knew she was no longer standing on the edge of friendship. Her heart had already crossed into something deeper, something she couldn't ignore. And as the city lights blurred past the car windows, Sandra realized the truth she had been running from. She was in love with him, but in a world that was ready to twist love into scandal, she wondered, was love enough to survive what was coming next? Cracks in the armor, the days that followed were heavy with tension. Sandra tried to move forward with her work, forcing herself into interviews and meetings, but every room she entered carried whispers that seemed louder than the questions being asked. She smiled when expected, answered politely, but inside she felt hollow, like her words were no longer her own. Every time she left a building, the cameras waited. Every flash reminded her that privacy was slipping further away, and that her quiet bond with Keanu was no longer just hers to hold. One evening, after a long day of dodging headlines, she returned home and found Keanu sitting quietly on her porch. He didn't call ahead, didn't knock, he just waited. When she stepped out of the car and saw him, her exhaustion broke into tears she had held back all day. He stood, walked to her, and without asking, wrapped her in his arms. For a moment, she let herself collapse into him, letting the outside world fade. Inside, they sat together in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't demand answers but allows wounds to breathe. Sandra finally whispered, "Keanu, I don't know if I can keep this up. Every day feels like I'm fighting just to stay upright, and then when I see you, I feel safe again. But that safety scares me too." He looked at her, his expression carrying that familiar sadness that always seemed to live behind his eyes. "Why does it scare you?" he asked softly. "Because if I let myself fall, if I let myself feel everything I'm starting to feel, then I risk losing you. And I don't know if I can survive that kind of loss again," she admitted, her voice trembling. Keanu stayed quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady on her. Finally, he said, "Life has already taken so much from both of us. But that doesn't mean we should close our hearts forever. Maybe love isn't about protecting ourselves from pain. Maybe it's about finding someone who makes the pain worth enduring." His words cut through her fear, but they also deepened it. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the fragile hope growing inside her, but the world outside made hope feel dangerous. A few nights later, they attended another event, a fundraiser for children's hospitals. Sandra had planned to walk in alone, but Keanu insisted on going with her. The moment they stepped onto the red carpet, the chaos began. Questions were shouted, cameras blinded them, and whispers turned into open shouts. "Are you in love? Are you hiding something? Is this a show?" Sandra felt her chest tighten, her hands trembling as she tried to keep her composure. Keanu, sensing her struggle, leaned closer and whispered just for her, "Don't look at them. Look at me, just me." She turned her eyes to his, and in that instant the noise faded. The camera still clicked, but all she saw was his steady gaze, reminding her that she wasn't alone. Still, when they got home, the pressure returned. Headlines were crueler the next morning, twisting their closeness into lies. One article accused Sandra of using Keanu's tragedy for sympathy. Another claimed their bond was manufactured for attention. Sandra slammed the paper down, her anger breaking into tears. "They don't know us. They don't know anything about us." Keanu picked up the paper, folded it neatly, and set it aside. "Then why let it in?" he said calmly. "They can write what they want, but we decide what is real." Sandra stared at him, her heart torn. She knew he was right, but fear still gnawed at her. But what if what's real between us isn't strong enough to survive this? His answer was steady, his voice carrying the weight of his truth. "Then let's not let them decide that. Let's decide it ourselves." And in that moment, Sandra realized she was standing on a fragile edge. She could keep running from the feelings she held for him, or she could take the risk and step into them fully. The choice was hers. But the storm outside was growing louder, and she knew it was only a matter of time before it tried to break them. The confession, the storm outside their lives, only grew fiercer. Every morning, Sandra woke to new headlines, new rumors, new questions about her and Keanu. She tried to block it out, but the noise found its way in no matter how many times she turned off her phone or avoided the news. What hurt most was not what they said about her, but what they said about him. People twisted his kindness into weakness, his loyalty into something to be mocked. She felt guilt burn inside her, guilt that he was paying the price for standing beside her. One night, after another brutal day of scrutiny, Sandra sat in her living room staring at the glow of the fireplace. Keanu was there too, sitting across from her, quietly flipping through the pages of an old book. The silence between them was comfortable, yet heavy with words unsaid. Finally, unable to hold it in anymore, Sandra broke the quiet. "Keanu," she whispered, her voice shaking, "maybe you should step away from me. Maybe you should let this fade before it ruins everything you've worked for." He lowered the book slowly, his eyes steady on hers. "Is that what you really want?" he asked. Tears filled her eyes. "No, but it might be what's best for you." He leaned forward, his tone calm but firm. "Sandra, I've lived long enough to know that what the world thinks doesn't define me. I don't measure my life by headlines or gossip. I measure it by the people I choose to stand with, and I choose you." Her breath caught, her heart aching at his words. She had held her feelings back for so long, afraid of what they might mean, afraid of what the world would do with them. But in that moment, under the quiet glow of the fire, the truth spilled from her lips before she could stop it. "I love you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know when it happened, I don't know how it grew this strong, but I love you. And that terrifies me more than anything." For a long moment, silence hung in the air, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Keanu's eyes softened and he rose slowly, crossing the room until he was standing before her. He reached down, gently taking her trembling hands in his. "I've loved you for years," he said quietly, his voice carrying both sadness and hope. "I never said it because I thought the world would crush it before it had a chance to live. But I can't stay silent anymore. You're not alone in this, Sandra. I'm right here and I'm not going anywhere." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked up at him. It wasn't the kind of confession she had seen in movies, loud and dramatic. It was quiet, steady, real, and somehow that made it even more powerful. She stood, her hand still in his, and for the first time, she allowed herself to lean fully into him. Not just as a friend, not just as someone who understood her grief, but as the man she loved. The embrace was gentle, but in it, she felt the strength of everything they had both endured, everything they had both lost, and everything they still had the courage to hope for. The world outside would keep twisting, keep shouting, keep trying to turn their truth into entertainment. But in that room, under the soft glow of the fire, Sandra and Keanu chose not to hide anymore. It was not the end of their struggle. If anything, it was the beginning of a harder fight. But now, they would fight it together. Standing in the light, the days after their confession felt different, even though the world outside remained the same. The cameras still followed them. The headlines still screamed and whispers still trailed behind their every step. But now, instead of shrinking under the weight, Sandra and Keanu faced it side by side. There was a new strength in Sandra's eyes, not because the storm had passed, but because she no longer stood in it alone. Their first public appearance together after the confession was at a charity gala. Sandra almost backed out at the last minute, her chest heavy with nerves, but Keanu gently took her hand and said, "We don't have to prove anything. We only have to be ourselves." His calmness grounded her, and she found the courage to step into the night with him. The moment they walked into the ballroom, the air shifted, conversations hushed, cameras flashed, and all eyes turned toward them. Sandra held her head high, though her heart raced. Keanu walked beside her with his usual quiet dignity, not needing the spotlight but somehow commanding it anyway. And as they moved through the crowd, something unexpected happened. Applause broke out. Not from everyone, but from enough voices to remind them that kindness and authenticity still mattered. Throughout the night, they spoke with guests, supported causes close to their hearts, and showed a bond that could not be reduced to rumors. They laughed quietly together, shared stories, and for the first time in weeks, Sandra felt something she had thought she'd lost forever: joy. Yet even in the light, shadows remained. When they returned home, Sandra sat on her porch staring at the stars. Keanu joined her and she whispered, "It still scares me. I know the world won't stop. I know they'll keep trying to break us." Keanu leaned back, his eyes on the night sky. "They might try," he said softly, "but we're not here to live for them. We're here to live for what's real between us, and as long as we hold on to that, they can't take it away." His words settled into her heart like a steady flame, small but unshakable. She turned to him, her voice trembling but filled with certainty. "Then let's not hide anymore. Not from them, not from ourselves. If we fall together. If we stand together." Keanu gave her a small, gentle smile, the kind that carried years of pain and resilience. "Together," he repeated, and the word felt like a promise. The next morning, a new set of photographs flooded the media. Sandra and Keanu, walking hand in hand, smiling not because they wanted to please the cameras, but because they had chosen to live their truth. The world reacted in every way possible. Some celebrated, some doubted, some criticized. But beneath the noise there was a shift. People began to see not just two celebrities, but two human beings who had endured loss, found strength, and dared to love openly, despite the weight of the spotlight. And for Sandra, that was enough, because at last she felt free. Their bond was not perfect, not free of pain, but it was real. And in a world built on illusions, real was the rarest, most powerful thing of all.